So in this video, I'm going to be dispelling the myth of motherhood that all mothers, when they give birth to their children, suddenly become unconditionally loving, caring, kind beings. With Mother's Day coming up, we have to acknowledge that for many people, their mothers were an anti-mother. They were a hateful mother. We're going to be looking at the malignant mother, the narcissistic personality or borderline personality type mother, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the struggles that such people might have, and also exploring why mothers might be this way towards their own children. I was just in yoga and the teacher said something that made me really pause and want to make this video. Mother's Day is coming up and she said, look, this particular pose was meant to activate anger from this kidney or gallbladder or something. And she said, it's fine to get angry because your mother will love you unconditionally. We have this view of motherhood that it is somehow this sacred, blissful union that mothers will just be ever kind and loving and caring to their children. And even if there's a little bit of a rift, your mother's still going to be treating you nicely and loving you no matter what. As a therapist, I object to this assumption. The generalization that all mothers love their children unconditionally doesn't do any service to the many people that have been victimized, brutalized, and abused by their own mothers. So there are psychologists and psychotherapists out there that are always going on about mother wounding. And they've got some pretty general descriptions of how this can occur. And I also want to dispel those myths or object to some of those descriptions as being too broad, where they describe emissions of undue amounts of care and attention towards the child as being neglect and abuse. They refer to this kind of inability of the mother to constantly attune to the child in a way that gives them this huge sense of self-love and self-respect and self-esteem as being a traumatic experience. And I really object to this because what does it mean to people that have been very traumatized by their parents in a very abusive way, or where the neglect has been done deliberately? We're talking about children that get locked away or locked outside by their parents, put out in the cold. I mean, that is not just neglect, that is abuse. That is traumatic. I don't know if not being able to attune to your child when you may very well love them at periods of time when maybe they need more than you can possibly give them really should be falling in the category of trauma and abuse. But this is my probably more personal opinion, but it's also supporting the people that I work with who have suffered significant amounts of trauma. And while trauma exists on a spectrum, the kind of trauma that I'm going to be talking about as we move on in this video actually needs a little bit of a trigger warning. I'm not going to go into graphic descriptions. I'm actually going to read from an article that I found online. So this is the story of Sinead O'Connor. And while she and her mother are both passed now, this was an interview that she did with Dr. Phil back in 2017 when she was 50 years old, where she's recounting some horrific abuse that she endured at the hands of her own mother. So it can be disturbing for people to think that mothers don't always love their children unconditionally, and that there are many instances where they can be incredibly cruel and abusive towards their children, particularly their daughters. Now, this isn't rare. This isn't one of those random instances where you hear about a mother giving her child up for trafficking. And very often the mother has got a personality disorder We're not talking necessarily about mothers that are suffering from depression or anxiety or some other kind of mental health condition that can lead them to be maybe not as great at mothering as they would like to be, but their intention and their love for their child is there. And they're compromised for a period of time by being significantly depressed or suffering from some form of anxiety disorder. Parents with a personality disorder, on the other hand, can do a lot of damage, which can be a little bit covert. So mainly we're looking at narcissistic personality disorder, and particularly the vulnerable narcissist that may also be malignant. And what's meant by this is that narcissist has an element of psychopathy or sadism in them. And as I tell the story that read the article that I'm going to from Sinead O'Connor, you'll understand what I mean by that. The other kind of mother that can cause a lot of damage to their child, particularly their daughter, is the borderline personality mother. Now, I've heard stories of this kind of a mother, and again, trigger warning, self-harming in front of her children, having wild, violent arguments with their partner in front of the children, doing some pretty disturbing acting out behavior, or very dramatically leaning on their child for emotional support and then turning on them. Now, this devil-angel behavior is particularly disturbing, and it can range anywhere from the mother being sometimes nice, sometimes calm, sometimes kind, sometimes she just getting along with life, and things might even be a little bit fun. But then at the drop of a hat, very unpredictably, she snaps. Vulnerable narcissistic mothers particularly, when they are triggered into their narcissistic wound, they erupt into a narcissistic rage. Now, when a narcissistic mother feels that she has been insulted, wounded, or maybe she's just too stressed, possibly something else has bothered her, or if she's very disturbed, some form of memory might have been activated within her. We can't really know for sure what's actually gone on within the mother to trigger this behavior, but it'll be this sudden, unpredictable outburst of ranting, raging, abusing, can be psychological abuse, name-calling, and often physical abuse and violence. So Sinead says, my earliest memory is she's telling me I shouldn't have been born. She didn't want me. She didn't want girls. She wanted me to be a boy. Whenever she beats me, which is daily, she makes me... Did I give you a trigger warning? She makes me take my clothes off, lie down, and she will attack my abdomen. She wants to burst my womb. She wants to destroy my reproductive system. She wants to stop me from being a female. Now, I'm sorry how disturbing that is, and it is a very extreme story, but it's not, sadly, the most rare example of this. And I said I was going to explore why it can be that this kind of particular malice occurs between mother and daughter so frequently. And it's certainly what I see showing up in my clinical practice. More women than men who are coming in with extreme stories of abuse subject at the hands of their own mother. So what Sinead has outlined is that her mother didn't want her. And this is often the case with narcissistic mothers or mothers that are very unwell with a personality disorder or psychopathy or sadism. They don't like children. They don't. But they're a woman and they get pregnant. And what we heard in that story I just read out was that her mother hated her specifically because she was a girl. She would have been more kind to her potentially if she was a boy. She wanted to destroy her femininity. And so what we often see in this dynamic between highly malignant mothers and daughters is this hatred that is projected onto the daughter by virtue of them being a girl also. Now, this can be because the mother didn't want to have children, so she's projecting this onto her daughter, that she will destroy the thing that makes her a woman so she won't have children. And this is not an act of grace. It's an acting out. Projective identification is where somebody wants to produce in the other, it's usually a closer relationship, the pain or the discomfort or the distress that they feel. They want the other to feel it. And this happens unconsciously. It's not a deliberate thing. The person doesn't go, I'm angry, I want you to be angry too. When somebody's angry, what can happen is that they project onto the other person. Are you angry at me? Like, why are you angry? Like, what's wrong with you? And they start to act as if the other feels like they do. So if we take this projective identification to its extreme, when we're looking at a mother brutalizing her own daughter, what we could hypothesize is that her own experience of being brutalized, or hating being a woman that had to have children, or feeling so dysregulated and stressed and rageful, gets projected into the daughter and is seen, therefore, as the unconscious source of all of these negative feelings. Now, because this is happening at an unconscious level, it's very dark, it's very shadow, it's very dark shadow, it's very negative. It's a very evil energy here that's happening because the mother is trying to destroy the daughter. And I've seen this and heard many examples of this. And it's shocking to hear. It's shocking to hear if we are walking around the world believing that all mothers love their children unconditionally. How do we understand the many examples where a child is far from loved, let alone unconditionally? In fact, they are brutalized and hated upon. In fact, they are virtually tortured by the parent who wants them to suffer because the parent has all of this dark negativity in them, all of this hatred, all of these toxic feelings that get projected into the child and then acted out upon. Now, Sinead had found a space of sympathy for her mother. The thing is, this is the crazy part about this dynamic between the malignant mother and the daughter. But it doesn't actually stop the child from wanting to love the mother. And if the malignant narcissist is the only mother that the child knows, then if she has love in her, she will want to love that mother. So it can actually work an opposite, that the child has some form of weird unconditional love for the parent, that they want to forgive them, that they want to have sympathy for them, that they do have caring, sympathetic, understanding, empathic feelings for the parent, despite what they are doing or have done to them. Eventually, the brutality comes to an end because the daughter gets big enough to stop it. And this happens a lot of the time also with sons and fathers. They get big enough one day, the child gets big enough to say no to the parent. They can hold their hand, they can leave, they can actually be big enough to say no more, that's enough. And that's when the physical abuse can end. But the psychological and emotional abuse can continue as long as the parent lives. And the child is unlikely, and I mean the adult or the teenage child, will crave still that good parent to come through, and maybe they will have hope because the mother has stopped beating them. But what we usually find is that the chance for this kind of happy ending and reconciliation doesn't happen. And the main reason for that is that the parent denies any responsibility or culpability or even admission to to what they have done. So if I continue reading Sinead O'Connor's story as it goes on, she says, "So one day I did ask her, 'Why did you do what you did to us?' And her mother said, 'I never did anything. What are you talking about?'" Now, this is very common. The malignant narcissistic parent, the borderline parent, the parent that is so unwell that they will unleash their fury and rage and hatred and abuse towards their child, their daughter, on a regular basis, has a splitting that happens where they completely disavow that this ever happened. This is a common feature in abusive relationships. The storm is over, the seas are calm, the parent is having their breakfast, the child is bruised, and the parent completely denies that they had anything to do with it. When a parent has abused a child, physically, psychologically, emotionally, and point blank denies that this was even the case, let alone apologizes, this is further damage to the child. The child has already grown up feeling that there is something fundamentally wrong with them, that they have had this kind of treatment from their own mother. They're in a world where the ideal and the ideology is that mothers are unconditionally loving, that they are some divine, caring, beautiful, loving, mushy, cuddly, hugging, oh, they're there being. And they're not. And so they look at other mothers or they watch mothers on television and they're like, that's how a mother is modeled as being. But my mother is mean and cruel and hateful and spiteful and rageful and hurts me and hates me. And so what happens? Well, I've said that the child can continue to try to love that mother, to try and hope that the good mother will suddenly appear, the mother that they see on television, that they see their friend has got. They hope that that mother will come from their mother, and they will get to a point where they realize that this will not happen. But the greater heartbreak is that that particular person, woman, what are we talking about, that particular daughter has spent her life dealing with the feelings that she is bad, wrong, and unlovable. These mothers seldom say that they love their children. They may show it in some weird way, but they never say it, they never express it, and most likely they don't love their daughters. And given the hateful behavior that they unleash upon their daughters, that sometimes very cunning, conniving, calculated cruelty, the daughter is left to deal with this whole constellation, the flow on of whatever intergenerational mother wound it was. The mother wound, the wounded mother has wounded. She is the wounder. And honestly, sometimes I look in these women's histories and there is not a justifiable reason for them to be so cruel. For every mother who has been mistreated or come from a line of intergenerational trauma, for every one of those that turns out in this hostile, hurtful way, there are about 10 more that realize what happened to them was not something that they want to continue with their own children. And whether or not they go to therapy, they make an effort and a decision not to pass this behavior on down the track and to not be cruel and mean and hateful and hurtful to their own children. So it's not true that just hurt people hurt people. A lot of hurt people don't want to do any harm. They can be very compassionate and kind, and while they may flip out every now and then and get stressed out and lash out, they are aware of what they've done, they take ownership for it, they feel regret, they feel remorse. The hateful mother doesn't. And so for everybody out there, for every woman who had a mother that was abjectly and deliberately mean to them, that For every woman that is struggling with Mother's Day coming up and thinking, well, I don't even feel like I had a mother. My mother was so mean. Why on earth would I be celebrating her on this day? My heart goes out to you. It is a very rough road. It's probably one of the most difficult roads that you tread. Because at the end of it all, lots of us have been abused. Many of us have been traumatized. Most people have experienced abusive and hurtful behavior at the hands of another human. It's just the way it is. And much of the time, that human will be someone in the family. And it may be a father and it may be a mother that does this part of the time, unintentionally, not maliciously. But for someone whose mother has not loved them, but instead has acted incredibly hateful towards them, that has deliberately hurt them and felt zero remorse or even acknowledgement. So let's spare a thought for the people out there who had a negative mother, who had a hateful mother, who did not have a mother that loved them unconditionally, no matter what mood they were in. And let's dispel the myth that this is part of who you become the moment you give birth, because it isn't. So thank you for watching this video. Sorry it was a little bit on the downer side, but this is the reality that many people live with. And this is the truth of the world also. So thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, you can like it and subscribe if you want to hear more of my teachings and thoughts and information. And whatever day you have on Mother's Day, let it be the way it is, because that is your reality. Thank you.